The next kind of cue that can influence first-pass processing of a sentence is described on page 298. It's frequency-based information. Frequency-based information deals with how often a word is used in the corpus of a language. So, as I mentioned in another chapter, some researchers have compiled a corpus of of a bunch of different kinds of material, like printed language and TV shows, and they've just compiled it all into a huge database, and they've counted up the number of times certain words were used and calculated the word frequency. So if you take 1,000,000 words and you divide the number of times the word "the" was used in 1,000,000, then you might come up with some number like 200,000 times per million, something like that. So that would be its rate of frequency. It would be 200,000 per million, and that would say how often we use that word. The frequency of a word can influence how an individual is willing to process it in a sentence. The more often we use it in a given way, the more likely it is that we're going to assume that in this new sentence, it's meant that same way. If the word could be used in a rarer way, then we're less likely to assume that that rarer way is the way that the author of the sentence is intending it to be used. The example of "the horse raced past the barn fell" includes frequency-based cue. The word "raced" is most often used as a kind of verb that somebody is doing on their own autonomously. So the horse raced, we would infer first that the horse is doing its own racing, because we most frequently use the word "raced" in that way. But there's another meaning of the word "raced." Obviously, there must be, because that's the crux of the ambiguity in the garden path sentence, and it's illustrated for us in the sentences later on in this paragraph on page 299. He says, "I raced, I have raced, the car was raced." All of these different versions of the word are spelled the same and they sound the same, but they're used differently. And the way that we know that they're actually different words is that we look at some other irregular verbs and we see that rather than using the same word in each of these situations, the word is changed. So, for instance, drove or drive, if we were to use that word in all those same sentences, it would be "I drove," not "I have drove," or not "the car was drove by my brother." Rather, you would have to say "I have driven," "the car was driven," but not "I driven home." So, if the word "drove" was the same in all of those situations, it would really be, we would consider "driven" a different word from "drove," and in a corpus, it would be calculated differently. Because the word "raced" sounds the same to us, we're tempted at first to say, oh, it's only one word. But really, in each of those different situations, such as "I raced," "I have raced," "the car was raced," each of those would actually, if you're going to construct a corpus, you would have to construct your corpus to differentiate between those three versions of the word. And each time you hear the word "raced" or print the word "raced" in your corpus, it would appear as a different entity for each of those different kinds of uses. And we would be able to calculate the frequency with which "raced" was used in one context or in one way versus another. And we would say the kind of "raced" that is a passive verb, like "the horse is being raced," that kind of "raced" is much less frequent in English than is the active "raced." And because of that, we use that cue, that frequency-based cue, to say, obviously, the word raced here must be the most frequent kind of raced. That's what the author must mean when he writes a sentence, because very infrequently do we use the word raced in this passive way, in the being raced kind of way. And so we're biased to accept the more frequent kind of way, even though that's not really what the author intended. So that's an illustration of frequency-based information and how it can be used to influence our understanding of a sentence, even if it's incorrect, as is the case in these garden path sentences, on the first pass.